The board has concluded its executive session. No written minutes were kept, no decisions were made. We have a second executive session that we are going to sequence now. But when we return from the executive session, we will have a work session to discuss building code and fee amendments and the rest of the agenda. Therefore, I move the board into executive session for the following purposes.
Pursuant to CRS 24 B and D, for the county attorney to meet with the Board of County Commissioners for the purposes of receiving legal advice on specific legal questions pertaining to the county's 1041 regulatory authority over period children's within its jurisdiction and determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategy for negotiations, and instructing negotiators with regard to proposed modifications concerning PPSL operations.
Second.
Motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. The board will adjourn into executive session. No written minutes will be kept.
Right. Come on down.
Okay. The board has concluded its executive session. No written minutes or caption, no decisions were made. Next on the agenda is a work session to discuss building code and fee amendments. Amy?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so this is a work session. We want to discuss a variety of changes to the building code. And just as Peter alluded to earlier, our still new Chief Building Official, David Danielson, came in and really hit the ground running, offering all sorts of structural changes and insights to ways we could be more efficient and effective as a building department. So today there are 5 basic things that we are here to talk about. One is that we are proposing the adoption of 2 new codes to adopt as whole codes. One is the swimming pool and spa code that will allow us to regulate hot tubs better. That is the existing building code, which is a section of code that we have not adopted. This will help us to better manage our older legacy buildings that are in the area, historic preservation, and to do better with that. So those are 2 codes that we are proposing adopting. Do you need some help? Okay. That we are adopting incomplete en masse, in whole, 2 codes. So that's one. Part 2 is that Dave came in and is recommending a whole series of building code amendments that we would like to add to improve some efficiency. He will talk a little bit more about that. So that's part 2. Part 3 is a series of amendments to our building fees. Heard about this a little bit as we've discussed the expansion of our building department to include service to Idaho Springs and Georgetown. This is a building fee permit, a building fee structure that is based on building valuation and the cost of the cost of delivering those permits. That allows us to make sure the fees that we collect cover the cost of our permit services for the building department. 1, 2, that's 3. Part 4 is that we are including a proposal and some information about our contractor licensing program in this package. And part 5 is some amendments to the building code that are related to the grading and excavation part of the building code, which is Appendix X. And that is related to that's why Stoy and Dustin are here, because the road and bridge manual, that full document has one part of it that is governed by the building code, specifically Appendix X. And so they have some amendments to that portion as well. So this is a little bit of a large set of stuff to review as a work session, but that is what we're here to do, is do large things. So that is what we're going to do. So Dave, I'm going to hand it to you to talk about the part 1 and part 2 to start, which is the codes that we are adopting and the amendments to the building code, to start there.
Okay, so to begin with, the new codes that we're suggesting to adopt is the International Existing Building Code. With the Unified Building Code approach coming up, it's going to be very important for us to have that existing building code to address those older existing buildings in Clear Creek County. We're going to adopt that largely unamended. There's going to be a couple minor amendments in the existing building code. The other code that we're recommending to adopt is the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code. So again, picking up Georgetown, Idaho Springs, there are a couple swimming pools and spas that are within those jurisdictions. And then that would also cover hot tub installations, which currently occur in Clear Creek County unincorporated. And that's where it'll be utilized for Clear Creek County unincorporated, largely unamended there. There's going to be a couple amendments to those codes, referencing them back to the IBC's administrative sections. So regarding the amendments to our building code, most of our changes are coming out of chapter 1, which are the administrative sections of the IRC and the IBC. For code enforcement practices, we're going to make some changes regarding when some of the permits expired, some of our reference standards. We're going to put a caveat in there if the Board of County Commissioners supports it for a licensure requirement for contractors in Clear Creek County.
There's a list in the packet.
There is a list in the packet of all the changes. Beyond that, is there any specific questions or concerns regarding the suggested amendments to the building code?
No. Can you talk to me a little bit more about, so like, as I understand it, existing buildings right now, when they go try to get a building permit, they have to comply with the building code that we have. If we adopt the existing building code, that would be the code that they would have to meet. Are the standards generally speaking looser, less loose? Is it an attempt to be more practical for you to remodel your home without having to redo your whole electrical system or something like this?
Right, so that existing building code is gonna mostly apply to commercial buildings and commercial occupancies. What it's gonna do is it's gonna make it more feasible for projects to take place in those existing buildings. There are certain limitations in the existing building code. When certain thresholds are met, more areas of the new building code need to be met. And so the existing building code really outlines and provides provisions for when and if scenarios of what levels of code compliance you need to bring your facility into.
So like, it is true that this is basically making it more practical for someone who has an older building to update their building.
Correct, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Dave, is there some part of this that is about being in alignment with the towns as well?
Yes, so there was an amendment to the existing building code. And that's down here at the bottom
In the red line, is this
in
where you're
the,
looking?
yes, in the red line version. Or the swimming pool and spa code. We're going to make an amendment to the existing building code to section 104.10 modifications. And in that specific section of the existing building code, we're addressing practical difficulties involved in carrying out the provisions of that code. We're going to allow the preservation committees of the local jurisdictions to have some authority over modifications to the existing building code when it might be practically infeasible to complete a project.
I have a question back on the portion George alluded to a little bit ago when he gave an example of the kinds of things that you have to do in existing buildings that this would maybe be more lenient on. And I don't know that the example he gave is one that would actually be affected, but I need you to confirm that. There's been typically in the past on remodel jobs, trying to remodel their house, once they go beyond a certain percentage of the system, for example, by the inspector's estimation or the plan's estimation, certain that if there's going to be an alteration or addition equal to a given percentage of the overall electrical system, then you're required to bring the entire house up to code once you exceed that threshold. Is there anything like that that's going to be affected by this existing building code because that's first of all, electrical's in the state's hands now, for one thing. And so it's not really a choice on our end. And secondly, so is there anything in that existing building code that actually impacts that particular idea? Because that's one of the biggest things that happens to people when they're remodeling is they find out they've got to bring their electrical system up to code throughout the house, even though they weren't planning to gut that other portion of the house, you know?
Right, yeah, so residentially, for single family residents, which is going to be most of the individuals in Clear Creek County, is only the areas that they are modifying are going to need to come up to current code regulations and current code standards. There's not going to be a threshold limit where you've remodeled 50% of your house. And we're going to require your entire structure to come up to new code requirements.
This was just on electrical they used to do.
Yeah, and we're only speaking to single family residential in that part. So.
Okay.
Any other questions on the two codes that we're adopting or on any of the amendments?
So the amendments to the IRC.
IRC and the IBC.
Yeah, okay, so the last one, the burial depth of gas line increased from 12 to 18. All the other jurisdictions are sitting at 18.
Yes,
We're currently sitting at some
12.
Is that what currently at, or is that just what the 21 code states?
We are currently at 12. That's what the 2021 code states. So Idaho Springs has chosen to increase their burial depth for gas line protection down to 18 inches.
Why was I under the impression that that was, oh, this is a broadband.
We were talking broadband, not gas.
Well, Excel talked to me about gas being out of line with.
We were at
with
5
IBC.
feet previously.
We were at something crazy like 5 feet, I thought. But we're not right now.
No, we're currently at 12 inches.
I think it was 5 feet in roadways. And that's what was driving people crazy was the, we were really getting hit on gas lines, gas line burial depth. And I think it might've been in road rights of way that it may have been a road and bridge regulation or something.
Yeah, that's a topic that's come up several times over the past several years, was burial depths in the right of way, which is not governed by the building code. And we have specific burial depths in the road rights of way that are outlined in our roadway design and construction manual. So it's a little bit separate from the building code here.
Covered by this, yeah.
No, so this is a separate that only applies on their private properties. And there's a different set of standards that apply in the roadway.
Thank you. More interested in the broadband conversation than the gas line conversation anyway. You know, we might as well just stop putting natural gas pipelines all over the place, whether they're 1 inch or otherwise. That's the only thing that came out to me as like otherwise. No other questions. Any other questions? No.
Okay.
Okay.
So I think next then I would ask you, Dave, to talk a little bit about the contractor licensing program specifically.
Yes. So starting from the building code, for the contractor licensing program, we would have to adopt a specific code section recognizing that contractor licensing is required for new construction, which we've done with the new code section. 1 second, let me get to it here. The new code section 105.1.3 permits license required. All persons undertaking work which requires a permit shall provided in 105 shall seek to obtain a permit from Clear Creek County, are required to have a current valid contractor's license in Clear Creek County. What we're trying to do there is ensure that all contractors and individuals performing work on the behalf of other individuals are adequately experienced, adequately knowledgeable, and have adequate insurance. So by providing this regulations, we're providing some consumer protections for everybody in Clear Creek County, the future homeowners, future building owners, everybody involved that would have work affected by any individual operating in Clear Creek County.
Megan has your document up.
Oh, she has my document up. Okay.
It's within the packet, so
Yes.
there's a specific thing. It might take me a while to find it.
Let me get my contractor licensing requirements up.
No worries.
So section 102 of the contractor licensing requirements specifically identifies the scope and purpose of the contractor licensing requirements. Generally to protect the public by ensure those undertaking construction, alterations, repairs, and demolitions of structures are qualified to perform such services. The rest of the regulation has been written to that end. I don't know what to touch on specifically here, which would be pertinent or important to the Board of County Commissioners to hear in considering this regulation.
You're talking about the licensing?
Yes, the contractor
licensing,
licensing
yeah.
requirements.
I think we're just a narrative of what you are requiring, what proof, what you're requiring in order to achieve that. What is your specific requirement in order to get that license?
Okay, so specific licensing requirements are identified in section 3.1. We are going to have at least 5 different types of licenses, class A, class B, C, D, and E licenses. Each one of those has a specific scope of which kind of work those individuals are allowed to undertake. Associated with each one of those contractor licensing requirements, we have the requirements of those licenses down in section 310, examinations of license approvals and issuances. In that section, we outline specifically what background information each
Mhm.
contractor will need to realize to obtain that specific license type. So a Class A license contractor has a little bit more stringent requirements to meet than a Class B or C license. Class D license is reserved for journeyman mechanical contractors, and then a Class E license is reserved for contractors performing a limited scope of work, roofing contractors, window contractors, siding, somebody doing a bathtub remodel or something like this. Electricians and plumbers will still be licensed with the state. So we won't be licensing those contractors. We will recognize those licenses though.
Talk a little bit about how this will affect the like a homeowner who's being their own contractor.
Yeah, so it is not the intent of the contractor licensing requirements to require homeowners performing work on their own property to obtain a contractor's license. So those individuals will still be able to work on their own homes.
And that's a matter of state law, right?
Yes, that is Colorado revised state statutes.
And then I think I've heard you describe a little bit about how this would get rolled out, like how would people who are currently providing contractor services in the county, how would we work with them? How would this transition in?
Yes, so that's somewhat addressed in section 312 probationary licenses. For individuals who have obtained permits in the county within the last calendar year up until December 31st, 2025, they will have a period of time which they can obtain a probationary contractor's license. At the expiration of that contractor license, they're going to have to meet some additional requirements to maintain and achieve a regular contractor's license in the county.
Questions?
How common is it do all of our municipalities require contractor licensing?
Idaho Springs currently has some contractor licensing requirements. Georgetown has some business license requirements, but it's very, very common for jurisdictions having authority, which have the building code in place to have contractor licensing requirements.
And my understanding is the towns have, at least on the contractor side, it's a little bit less robust than the program we're envisioning, closer to a contractor registration than any sort of evaluation of the credentials of the contractors. And when we've described these programs to towns, they've been very happy and receptive to seeing this sort of that we have the ability and willingness to offer this service and to help make sure that the people doing work in the county are qualified.
If the board chooses not to pass this, how does this impact our plans? Is this at all related to the Unified Building Department?
Not directly. We have put some projected revenue in the budget for this program.
And probably if we projected some expense.
You're talking about,
Not directly. I don't believe there's any projected expense for this.
No, this is a cost recovery program. So any expenses it takes to administer this program, we will recoup through contractor licensing fees.
That's what I mean. Basically, if the program doesn't exist, you could find something else to do with your time.
Yes, we could.
there's that too. Yeah.
And I don't, I mean, with your job while you're at work, just to be very clear, like.
It's providing a benefit to our community also, right? To know that someone's licensed in terms of doing their work. I was a little shocked that we don't have this at the state level, seeing that in multiple states I've worked in, so.
It's gone up and down. It's gone back and forth here, but there's never been a state. I know there was virtually never a state a general contractor's license requirement. There's never been one here that I knew of.
So we just went through the ISO certification. And part of that ISO certification, there's a rating system that's scaled 1 through 10, and depending on the structure of your building department and some of the background requirements that you have, one of which being contractor licensing, you obtain a higher score. And as you obtain a higher score, it benefits the residents of the county because they end up getting a lower insurance premium for their house. So this would be beneficial as a whole to all homeowners, besides just ensuring that they're going to have a licensed contractor performing the work, they're going to be knowledgeable, but they could potentially see a reduction in their insurance costs on their home.
Yeah, it feels like a little bit of a stretch that we can get our ISO scores much better without like a dramatic change to firefighting infrastructure around the county.
Yeah.
Well, I don't like, that's my initial reaction because we've spent a lot of time on the fire department board looking at ISO scores and what we can do to improve them. And basically, if you're not within like 500 yards of a fire hydrant, you're not going to have a very good ISO score, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Perhaps that's the case. So that may not be an argument for the contractor licensing program, but it certainly can't hurt our scores. And
Yeah.
It is an enhancement to consumer protection and to the quality of work that's taking place. I mean, there are cases where having a contractor conduct work on a project is eyebrow raising. And it's because their qualifications are questionable. And it does limit our ability to use the code in the way the code is designed to be used.
I'm not looking for a license, but I'm asking this question for a friend. But I'm seriously not looking for one because I know I could end up getting a license. But there are unique, what I'm looking at is the under in the section directly under 3.1 before you get into 1, 2, 3, and 4. The sentence, it just says you can get a license by satisfying one of the following provisions, and there are 3 basic provisions: an item from 1 and an item from 2, which means that you have to have passed the requisite exam for that license, as well as, depending on the type of license, X number of years of experience. And then satisfy 3 and 1 item from 1, 3 being hold a bachelor's degree and also take one of the tests. And you can argue which of those is more or less onerous. Granted, you got to go to school for 4-ish years to get the degree. Most people learn a portion of what they're going to need to know to do those things when they go through a 4-year college program. And then the third one is satisfying 4 or 5, and it either 4 or 5. And that's, you've had a probationary license. If you have a probationary license, you can get a regular license upon completion of not less than 32 hours of code-related education, et cetera, or holders of equivalent licenses. And is that current holders of equivalent licenses or history of licensure? And I'm going to offer myself up. I'm a person with 40 years of experience that I can mostly demonstrate and document. And I've held a Class A license in Jeffco, which means I can build anything. But that's long expired because I've been a county commissioner for 8 years. So is that start over from scratch and go back to college, or what is it?
No, at that point, the section 5 here is specifically addressing reciprocity. So individuals who are holding active license in other jurisdictions will be able to come to our county and obtain their contractor's license without jumping through all these same hoops. Individuals who have had licenses that have been expired more than a year will have to go through and meet these requirements again. So since you have the experience, you would satisfy that requirement already. You would just have to demonstrate the testing again.
Take a test again.
Yeah.
I've been tested a couple times for licenses, but okay.
Yep.
That's what I wanted to know, is if you're required to do that again. So,
Do those tests cost a fair amount of money? Are they readily available?
They're readily available through the ICC and they do cost a few $100s, yes.
And I'm not looking for that work, just so you know. I figured you only live once. And so if you do something for 40 years, why would you go back and do it again, even if you do something different? You know,
Sorry, Mitch.
Yeah, I drifted away, so you get to go.
The question that's in my head. What is the bigger problem in the contractor, in the supply of contract services in Clear Creek County? Is it the quality of services or is it the availability of services? Might be both, right? Those are not mutually exclusive, right? You can struggle to find poor quality services, which is probably where we're at. Generally speaking, I don't mean to cast aspersions on every contractor in Clear Creek County. There's a bunch of good ones that are really busy. Really, really hard to find contractors in this county. Kind of concerned about what this policy might do to make that situation go from bad to worse.
Well, I think it's positive moving the due diligence from the property owner or the person who's hiring them. And it doesn't totally remove it, but it does change the due diligence process that a homeowner would have to go through.
Yeah.
You know, I look at everything that's in this document and makes me think I wouldn't have to work as hard if I wanted to renovate a kitchen.
You just have to work well, you may have to work harder to find somebody and you may have to work harder to afford their.
you might have to work harder because you have to renovate the kitchen instead of hiring someone.
And I'm not expressing a strong opinion. This is the board's first stab at this. I almost kind of want to ask for a little bit of public process around this. Right? Like maybe we can ask the public some questions about what kind of challenges they're facing. You gotta work on your poker face.
I mean, I think getting some more data, I think could be helpful. Some of the things that was before you mentioned that, what I was thinking was providing you some data on whether introducing contractor licensing programs expands the available contractors in a community or reduces it. Because it may be that when you expand this, that especially with a reciprocal program, that this incentivizes contractors who are working in neighboring communities who are licensed to add their names to our list of licensed contractors and join our program so that they are, you know, available to our community as well. It may enhance that availability, but I don't know if that's true or not. I'm not 100% sure that a public process is exactly the way to get at whatever your questions are, because I think there are questions that might not be the best way to get at what you're looking for. It may be a cumbersome and challenging process to ask this question, and it may get answers that are not fully informed or fully shed light on what we're really trying to get at.
It's kind of like asking people whether they want to pay more or less or make it more. I think it's, you know, having regulations does two things. Number one, it induces, it actually levels the playing field a little bit, having licensure. Because you'll say it doesn't because certain people are eliminated, but what it does is if our object is to create quality work, what happens when you don't have, for example, I'll give a similar example over in Delta County and other counties in the state. There is not only not a contractor licensing, there's not even a building department and a building code other than state requirements, you know, and environmental health, stuff like that. And so your state licensed people still have to get inspected and pull permits at the state level. And otherwise, it's a free for all. And what that means is that competent licensed contractors who do have all their insurance and have all the stuff they're supposed to have and have gotten licensed or educated, or at least are having to pass inspections, people that do competent work stop coming around because they're competing with anybody with a hammer. And that with, or just a cell phone and a checking account, you know? Anybody can be a contractor in that environment. And what that means is that it generally drives down quality and it drives down price.
Right.
And what happens is the people that know how to spell business overhead and stuff like that just withdraw because they can't compete and deliver what they're used to delivering, you know, whether for whatever reason, that's their business model. And so what you're left is those who are less qualified doing the work.
Yeah.
And it's hard, and it becomes even harder to find. Now, we do have a building department, we do have building codes, and people do have to meet those regulations here at least, and they have to get inspected. And so that weeds out a lot right there. Then the question is whether licensure, you know, provides that same dynamic to the industry. And you could argue that at least, you could say that there's people that maybe don't, it's possible maybe that there's people that don't compete here because they're fully licensed, accredited, educated contractors somewhere else, and they don't have to compete with that here. Like they do in Jeffco or somewhere else. The Jeffco contractors don't want to come up and compete. But I don't know if that's true or not, because we can't find contractors at all here right now. It seems like it's wide open for somebody to come in and the price, and unlike in some of these other places, the prices aren't down here to hire a contractor right now because of the availability of them at all, because we're so close to the Denver metro area.
Right.
So I know I'm not getting us anywhere on this. I have some mixed feelings about it. I like having contract licensure on top of having building codes and stuff like that. I also recognize we are where we live, and I hear George's comments. And so making it too onerous to get in and get in on the ground floor. The reason I bring up experience, it's easy for me to say, oh, I got that one down. Well, yeah, I should by now. And, but how do you, it's a kind of a cart and a horse problem. If you need to have, if it depends on what you need, 5 years of experience or 10 years or 15 years of experience doing what? It says related to the license that you hold. And so how do you get 5 years of experience as a general contractor if you can't get a general contractor's license? Because you don't have 5 years of experience, you just around in that loop, around in a circle. How do you get in to begin with? So what kind of experience do you consider as aggregating towards that 5, 10, and 15 years of experience? That's the question I would have, because I don't see it spelled out here really clearly.
Yeah. Generally, that experience that we'd be looking for would be working under somebody that has that contractor license that you're applying for. So for instance, if you're going to get your first Class C license and you have your 5 years minimum experience, you would have had 5 years working for a Class C contractor, Class B contractor, somebody of that sort, and that would be demonstrating your work experience. And it would just be a short resume submitted via an affidavit.
So you're a framer for a contract for a Class A licensed person, and 5 years later, or whatever the number of years is, you meet that requirement.
Well, if you're, yeah, it depends on whether you're an employee of theirs or you're a subcontractor to them. When you say framing as an example, that's normally a subcontract, a general contractor.
Okay. Thank you for indulging this rabbit hole. I have I need to express those concerns. Randy, what you're saying is pretty darn persuasive. I could be talked into implementing a registration program to build some data, build an audience, to start asking some questions of, hey, would you meet these requirements? I have some the questions I have out there is like, who's currently in business right now that we're putting out of business, right? Who's those are some of the questions in my mind, and I don't know how to answer them.
So these are drafted and written in such a way that ideally we wouldn't be putting anybody out of business. That individuals who are already working in those trades and in those fields through our probationary licensure will be able to get a license next year immediately. Our goal here isn't to put anybody out of business. It's just to maintain that minimum level of education and demonstration of experience.
Yeah, and I would say there's a good deal of entrepreneurship in a small environment like we're in, population and business environment like we're in. There's a good deal of entrepreneurship that happens for people to even get by and find and become contractors. And so I support the idea of the system right now. I look at those requirements to get each one of those types of licenses and say they may need to be relaxed a little bit in order to give people even the opportunity to not dissuade people from trying to do it to begin with, because, you know, you can go to school for 4 years without working in the field and come out, or you can go to work for somebody for 5 years and actually do the work and in order to get there and test out. Those are kind of equivalents to each other, and I kind of get it. But there are people that come out and start working in that field that are given opportunities. People want them because they're demonstrating quality work and they want to start that business, but they got another 3 years. They got to work as, you know, it's kind of like indentured servitude or something after a while. I had an experience like that in school where I was already operating as a licensed contractor, doing the kind of work that I was studying and learning to expand. And I was told that to get this last class and the hours in that class and graduate from school, I had to go intern on a job working for one of my competitors in order to get my degree. And I said, you know, I got all the rest of the knowledge. I'm not going to be slave labor for one of my competitors in order to have you give me something that I already know how to do and I'm doing at this time. So it's just that kind of thing that you're dissuaded from doing it because you're trapped by the system and remaining at a certain level for too long a period of time, I think. So that it's that 5, 10, and 15 years of experience, and what particularly counts towards that experience, I think needs to be, you know, 5, 10, and 15 might need to be relaxed in some manner. And in my opinion, since it's not an apprenticeship program, and then to be more clear about what those experiences would be that would qualify you to move up into that level. Right.
Okay, that's good direction. I think we can, when we bring this back, we will add some more, maybe some softening a little bit of the probationary opportunities make sure that we are doing our best to include our existing contractor pool, that this doesn't exclude anybody unless they are unqualified and being, you know, causing harm, you know, being harmful, which is what the goal of this program is intended. And maybe we can also bring you back a little bit more data on our current contractor pool to just help shore this up just a little bit more.
I do want to point out that the grand majority of the work that happens in Clear Creek County would be finished and completed by individuals holding Class C, D, and E licenses, which are the most easy to get. The Class B and A licenses are really projects that an outside contractor from outside the county most likely would come in and do. These are new home builds, major demolitions of structures. Class A license allows you to build any structure. So that would be a 1 million square foot warehouse, which an individual probably wouldn't need.
Office building.
Yeah, an office building, whatever. Most individuals taking on that work would already be licensed because it would be a requirement and a condition of the loan.
Right.
So I don't think that the A and B really need addressed,
Yeah.
but we could definitely take a look at C, D, and E.
C's entry level, I think that's where you can build a single family, or you can build, you know, the typical 2-story type thing or something. And it's C and B, there's kind of overlap in there, but the B, I agree. If you're getting into multifamily work and you're getting, you know, commercial and multifamily, and especially an A license, you know, require whatever you want to. You shouldn't be able to build this. I held an A license in Jeffco, so I could have built anything in Jeffco. And there is 90% of that stuff I would have never taken on because I wasn't qualified to begin with, if you want to know the truth. So even there, so I get it.
So we have 2 more topics to cover in this work session. And I want to acknowledge Troy and Dustin, who have been sitting here waiting patiently. And so I will,
Sorry, quickly before we move on. In answer to the question about how this compares to our neighbors and their contractor
okay,
requirements would be helpful.
great.
Yeah.
What I thought we would do is move on and go to amendment, appendix X, and just let Dustin and Troy talk a little bit about what is included in their portion of the building, and then we will wrap up with fees as our final topic.
Yeah, I'm piggybacking on Amy and David's presentation here for this work session, just because I have asked them to include some fairly minor amendments to our grading and excavation regulations, which are housed in our building code and have been. And so they're titled as Appendix Chapter X. I think they start around page 20 of the document that David and Amy had provided to you. And they're largely intact from what they have been adopted historically. But I am proposing a few minor revisions in there that I just wanted to run by the board with this opportunity of the work session. And the subsequent building code adoption. Are there any questions to begin with? As far as the list of changes there, or would you like me to kind of go through? There's it looks like, I've outlined kind of 6 areas that I've updated in that. I can just run through the list if you like, or if there's anything standing out that you'd like me to address or have any questions about.
Yeah, what are the changes to the deviation criteria?
So the deviation criteria before was intended really to provide a deviation process solely for the grading and excavation regulations. And the grading and excavation regulations are meant to govern site work on development projects outside of the public road right of way. And so this is, primarily single family residential development and other developments here in Clear Creek County, unincorporated Clear Creek County. And, the existing regulations have a deviation process that was really straightforward, that allowed the county engineer to provide for deviations within the grading and excavation regulations. And then just had some simple language to provide an appeal to the Board of County Commissioners if that decision was challenged. What we've done in regard to the deviation process is add some very simple language in there to also include the reference documents that are governed by the grading and excavation regulations. And the intention of that is to reference our roadway design and construction manual, or at least sections of that govern driveways and parking areas. And so that's really just bringing that deviation process to not only apply to the grading and excavation regulations, but also the driveway standards and kind of those road standards as they would apply to development projects. And so that was one minor change that we included in there, just to kind of bring that process together. And then in addition to that, we just added some criteria in there rather than just broadly, we had some broad language in there that the county engineer can provide for deviations to the grading and excavation regulations. We wanted to list some criteria in there to be like, hey, here are the considerations that would be considered when making that determination, as well as some specific criteria that's to be evaluated when going through a deviation request. And so we've added that criteria in there. Happy to kind of go through that and the different considerations that are included in there, as well as criteria. And then just some submittal requirements, some simple submittal requirements that are expected along with the deviation request, so that we don't get just a really broad deviation request. Just like, hey, I want to build a 20% driveway. We would also like some review of alternative designs in that and some narrative to justify, how that they're kind of meeting the considerations and criteria for this deviation process. And so some just simple submittal requirements in there to help provide some guidance for that deviation request process when that comes in. And so that's really the majority of the revisions that we're asking you to consider and in this manual. And again, it's kind of this odd area where, it's these kind of these separate regulations in the roadway design construction manual that primarily addresses work in the road right of way, but also contains the driveway standards in there. And so that the driveway standards, the chapter from our roadway manual, has historically been adopted as an exhibit to the building code. And then this appendix chapter X is embedded into our building code as a building code amendment, which just provides for some additional grading excavation regulations. And so it's trying to bring all that together and kind of provide one kind of consistent permitting guidance and process for both driveways and other grading permits.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
Okay, I think we're done with that part.
I think this will come forward, the specifics with this will come forward with the process that Stoy will manage to adopt the roadway manual.
Thank you for that, Amy. And yeah, I think it's worth noting that, that my goal is to present this board with revisions to the entire roadway manual on December 10th, for your consideration. There's just some minor revisions throughout that document, some revisions to the driveway and parking area standards that we've discussed with the board here through a couple of different work sessions over the course of the past couple of years. We think that we've kind of taken that direction from the board from those work sessions and incorporated into the proposed revisions that we'd like to present to you on December 10th. That cover the driveway and parking area standards, and then some other just kind of routine corrections in there. I have heard you about burial depths for utilities in the road right of way. We're going to be taking a look at that and take a stab at that. We're talking to Beth, who's kind of one of our leaders in this broadband initiative, and some of the challenges that and feedback that she's received. And along with our public works director, Carl, to kind of discuss, some revisions. Just to clarify, on that point, there's fiber is not mentioned in our roadway manual. So there is not a set standard that addresses fiber, specifically. So I think there's been some words kind of put in our mouths in some cases, in some of these proposals. But that being said, I think there's some room to maybe clarify some stuff and maybe include fiber in there and maybe, provide some direction in that. But in the case of other communication conduit lines, whether it is a cable line or a telephone line, we do have a table that covers those specifically, and we have them separated. We have a burial depth assigned for a service or distribution line, different burial depth for a main or a trunk type line. And so there is some two different areas there. They're not very well defined. What is a service line versus a main line? Is it
Are you talking gas now or back to?
both? It's listed for gas, for water, for, I'm not sure if electric has two separate categories there, but definitely in communication lines, cable communication lines are called out separately, and telephone lines are called out separately, but we don't have a category for fiber type of communication lines. They've been kind of administered similar to the cable and telephone lines, which do for the distribution lines, for that category, has I believe it's a 2-foot burial depth. And then when you get to that trunk line, then it does jump to that 4-foot burial depth, which I think people have seen and has really caused some concern that it's like, hey, this whole thing has to be built at a 4-foot depth. We do want to take a look at that. I don't know that we're ready to propose something to you that would be, hey, let's do everything at 18 inches or even 24 inches. I don't know that our road and bridge department is really comfortable with that because we're seeing a lot of damages to the existing infrastructure that's in there. And, our contractors hit these existing communication lines. We do when we're doing ditch maintenance and replacing culverts and other areas. And so there's real concerns about, this burial depth, and it does come at a cost when we damage these. We just damaged one last week that feeds the transfer station and killed the communication line, such as it is, to the transfer station for a couple of days. And that's the third time in the past couple of years that's happened to that particular line. And so there is, we do have justified reasoning for, requiring a certain depth on that. But I just want to acknowledge that we do hear you. We want to take a closer look at that, make sure we're kind of in line with our adjacent communities and.
Well, I remember from this being one of the first things I addressed when I came in 8 years ago with Sean was gas line depth. And it was the first thing that popped up on my radar when I got here. And I know we went through all the due diligence at that time, and I requested it to examine all the counties around us. I called around to a bunch myself. We determined that we had a 5-foot gas line depth. And I think the question was, they were trying to achieve adequate depth beneath culverts and ditches in the road right of way so that they were protected. Plus, there was this very onerous 5-foot depth. And I can't remember if the issue was that we had to get 5 feet beneath the lowest point or the point where it was running. So they had to be 5 feet below those access points, culverts and so forth under driveways, which puts them down to, they're trying to dig into granite. You got to go 7 feet down. It made for extraordinarily expensive lines. And so it increased, it ends up being ultimately borne by the consumer at the end of the day, because one way or another, the overhead filters down into your cost. And And when we looked at all of the counties around us, we determined at that time that we were way more than everybody. And we got the answer back that, well, that's what we feel like we need to do here. And there was no give on the other end. And it was from Road and Bridge. I'll state that at this time. So that's been one bone of contention that's lasted the last 8 years. And if we hadn't, I wouldn't feel as strongly the need that George, same as George that he brought up, had we not demonstrated already once and gone through the whole thing to see what everybody around us was doing. And we looked at places all around the state, trying to see like, where is there anybody like us in the mountains or anywhere else that's doing this? And there were only a couple of 3 places that were running this, the kinds of depths we were requiring, and it was specific to gas lines. The gas lines were seen as especially dangerous, and so we were forcing them way down into the ground in a place that it's really hard to get into the. So.
Understood. And I don't want to derail Amy and David's presentation too much, but we will take a look at that along with other direction that we received from the board, and we look forward to presenting that to you on December 10th. That will include those driveway and parking area standards as well for your consideration at that time. If the board chooses to adopt that, then it gives us a really good opportunity to then re-adopt them as part of the building code, the new standards, so that we have consistency in both the roadway manual and the building code, especially in regard to that specific chapter on driveway and parking area standards.
Thank you. A question I'm likely to ask is when you hit something at the current depths, is that evidence that it needs to be deeper, or you need to do something differently when you're digging?
It could be both. I think both scenarios exist there. But just again, I think most of us are familiar with this problem we've been having with Soda Creek Road with the water, coming up to the surface there in the middle of the road. We've been working on that. We've had a contractor in there to kind of place the fix for that, this manhole and drainage system under the road there. As they were doing that, they went through the typical processes of calling in locates and locating the utilities there, and still managed to get this communication line. When we did the paving project, we also replaced the culvert just a few hundred feet downstream of this area. When we replaced that culvert, or when our contractor replaced that culvert, they also hit this same line, because this one line is not very, very deep. And as Randy was noting, a lot of times we get into bedrock in these situations, and it's very difficult and very expensive to bury those deeper. But we have the same conditions that we need to kind of get down deep to place our culverts, or oftentimes replace our culverts. And if that utility line is over the top of the culvert, or in between culverts, or directly underneath that culvert, and really a bedrock, a communication line, and then a culvert sandwiched right on top of each other, then oftentimes when we pull that culvert, it gets damaged just because they're in conflict with each other. And I don't know, you don't really need to point fingers, and it's like, oh, it's the contractor who's replacing the culvert, or it's the communication person that installed that. There's real challenges in that, and real expenses in that, and burying those deeper. But that is part of it. And oftentimes when we go through and replace culverts, we're upsizing those culverts as well, because they don't meet, our criteria for, accommodating a 25-year storm event, or if we're able to, to even accommodate a larger storm event. So if we have an undersized culvert, and we have, oftentimes, gas lines that are under and over it, along with communication lines that are all kind of interacting together in this small soil envelope sitting on top of bedrock, and they're all sandwiched together. So it's not an easy problem to really solve for any of us. But I just want to note that there is expense on either side in the installation of trenching this stuff in, but also when we damage this stuff, it comes at an expense too. Either we deal with the outages and all the expenses that come with that, losing your service for a certain amount of time, and then the cost of the repair. And my understanding is that fiber, especially when you get into larger fiber lines, that becomes even more expensive. Those repairs on those lines, and oftentimes they're serving larger service areas, and so again, we just want to think about that and make sure that we're not setting ourselves up to install a bunch of fiber lines that are going to get repeatedly damaged and cause a lot of outages and expenses in the long term.
I understand that you want it deep enough. I just say that 5 feet beneath the culvert is a lot. That's all I'm saying.
No, I understand that.
5 feet to make sure you're below the culvert's one thing. 5 feet below the culvert is like, you're kind of breaking out on the other side of the planet pretty soon. So
Yeah, and I think that there is room to reevaluate that and make sure that we're, kind of in line with others, and providing, appropriate protection for these utilities when they're installed. And apologies that this has not been addressed before now. I have heard it before and I have not yet addressed it. There's that along with several other things in this roadway manual that we really wanted to get in front of you for your consideration and show that we've, heard your direction and want to present you with that. And this is one of those items. I don't have a preview for you on this particular thing, but we're meeting with Beth and Carl currently and we'll talk about what those depth requirements are and see if we can provide some clarity in that and see if we can relax those in some cases.
thanks.
Board two, I just wanted to better late than never introduce Dustin Bertelson. I don't know if you've had a chance to meet him yet, but Dustin works with Stroy in site development and he also works in the annex. And I get up the pleasure of working with Dustin quite a bit. He's new and really competent. Well, new might not be a great adjective. He's been with us for quite a while now, but he's really competent and a great addition to our team.
Thank you for that, Amy. And I'm
Yeah.
sorry if I was negligent in introducing Dustin here, but he's been with us over a year now. And he is here because he is the one, I'm helping, kind of, provide for some recommended revisions to some of these standards. But Dustin is the one that is tasked with administering these grading and excavation standards and driveway standards as people come in for their permits. And he's doing great at it.
Yes.
Thanks for choosing us, Dustin.
He's also doing some code enforcement work indirectly, one way or another. He is involved in many code enforcement cases.
Yes.
Okay, fees?
Yes, this is our last topic of the 5 for this massive work session item. Everybody. So for fees, there is a draft fee schedule included in your packet. And as I mentioned in the intro, and you have heard about this topic as we've discussed in the, a couple times with the, discussion on the expansion of the building department. The main news flash, I think, of this item is that we are proposing a change to the way we calculate our fees. That's based on a formula that basically ensures that the fees we collect cover the costs of the building department. And so that's the headline. And I'm going to hand it to Dave to see if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, so that's a very good start for what we have here for our building permit fee schedule. It's a cost recovery method that utilizes the building department's previous year's annual budget adjusted for inflation, which we're going to eliminate anomalies out of that because we are a small community. We have some projects that come through that could cause a major fluctuation in our cost of construction. We'll divide that by the total annual cost of construction for the year prior to come up with a permit fee multiplier, which will be applied to a permit fee. So once we have a permit fee multiplier, we have our estimation or guesstimation of what that cost of construction is, or we will use the building value database from the ICC, which is a multiplier based on square footage of construction and construction type to come up with our permit fee on an individual basis. So for work other than new construction, the permit fee shall be calculated utilizing the cost of construction, materials and labor, or as determined by the building official, whichever is greater. So that just allows us to address when people have egregiously undervalued their project and have provided us with maybe only materials or something like that. We have a fee schedule down below with other fees as applicable for additional costs to those permittees. Some examples are temporary certificates of occupancy, residential temporary certificate of occupancy, wildfire hazard mitigation, development and inspection, deferred addendums when they don't have all their submittal documents up front and ready for us when we have to go through and do additional plan reviews. We have a fee associated with that as well. Any questions regarding the permit fee schedule?
I feel like we've had this conversation recently. And I think I asked a bunch of questions.
There were some of this came up when we discussed the expanded building department. We did dig into the fees with some bit of a shovel.
You got anything about archaeology tools?
I don't know. I don't know what's going.
Anyway,
It's late.
I don't think I have any, I don't think I have any questions. I don't know about my colleagues here.
No, I'm looking at the permit fee thing still right now. I just don't, yeah, it all makes sense to me. How much you spend divided by how much value of how much you're working on. And then when you do the permit, you take the value of that project and multiply it times that multiplier. It's pretty simple.
This formula did come from the ICC.
Yeah,
We
it's
did not
pretty,
invent this.
pretty basic. And
Yes.
construction cost is, of course, is cost per square foot based on what you're most recently seeing. And do you adjust that according to the type of construction or do you not?
Yes, it is adjusted. If you go to the ICC and you look up the construction valuation database, it is divided into the types of construction and the square footage and then the occupancy group too. So depending on the type of occupancy, which it is, and the type of construction, it might have a higher valuation. So for instance, like you had an ambulatory care facility, if we were putting in a hospital and it was 2B construction, it would have a higher valuation than a 2B building that was utilized for simply storage. So the ICC does a phenomenal job of breaking down cost of construction based on occupancy group. So it's very specific to what you're building.
Well, I think the place where you get the widest deviations that cause the most heartache or give some people the greatest deals are when you take for example, a single family residence. That's where it gets really dicey because there's a really wide range of construction costs there. So if you settle on one for single family residences, someone with fairly small projects can get dinged pretty hard based on that cost. Whereas although there's an economics of scale on larger projects, but larger projects are also where you see a huge amount of valuation and a huge increase, exponential increase in the amount of materials required and stuff like that. So using that one flat rate in single family residential can produce some really weird results sometimes. And if somebody's building a nice, got one thing you're using that strikes a median, somebody can be building a nice huge place and be thrilled with the price of their building permit and someone else might not be.
Yeah.
They're on the low end, so. Just a comment, and I'm not saying you should change anything, other than if somebody might be able to make that case to you that they think they're grossly overvalued at some point. And I've worked in places where they actually asked us they wanted to see some evidence or understand what the construction value of what is our budget for this project? They'd come at it, like there should be a process of appeal where somebody can present their actual budget for the process. Of course, you got to be able to weed out the BS so that doesn't become a loophole if people are gaming. But
I can speak to that a little bit. If you're using the ICC information, that is pretty low. That's basically the bottom floor, lowest amount of cost per construction you're going to get. Currently, like a single family residence is valued at $165 per square foot.
That's not going to happen.
Nobody's building for $165 per square foot anywhere. I mean, around here, it's $250 to $300 on the very low end materials and labor.
Right.
So it's fairly favorable using the ICC information.
This is a work session, so I would just encourage you to think about whether you need to put a modifier on that in light of that fact that you just elevated.
Yeah. So I've thought about the modifier and I know you're not looking for an answer right now and we can think about it a little bit more. But if everybody's appropriately lower than what the actual cost is and everybody's on the same playing field and we're using that permit fee multiplier, it's not really going to make much sense to have a regional modifier.
It's like Prego.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I would state is it sounds like where I'm concerned that here's your model and there's some people that are getting hurt that are down here. It sounds like the floor is down beneath everybody. So nobody's getting a raw deal. There's just some people that are going to be getting really, really great deals in terms of the actual amount that it costs them once they get up to, that 8,000 to 10,000 square foot place, because it's kind of like boats, it expands, take the length of the boat, it's exponentially. Once you run to 3 dimensions, it gets a lot bigger in materials. You got to cube it.
Refresh my memory, what is going to trigger the annual evaluation of the fees?
Do you want to speak to that or do you want me to?
I want you to.
Okay, so what's going to trigger the annual evaluation of the fees is our annual budget and our last year's previous project. So this is going to be something that happens every year regardless as we approach the end of our calendar year. We're going to use the trailing 12 months of construction data information, and we will use our projected budget for the next fiscal year, the next calendar year. The building valuation data that we're using is going to be the most recent building valuation data table that's been released. They released two of them a year, one in February and one in August. So we'll be using the most recent one.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I want to add to that. So we're going to modify our budget process also to ensure that all of our fees are reviewed on an annual basis as it's part of our budget process in terms of what we bring to you for proposed budget in the end.
Thank you. I would welcome that. Anything else?
No, that covers it. Well, what I can tell you is we will be bringing this back to, for a resolution, for your consideration on
18th right
the
now.
17th? Yes, on the 17th. And so that's when we will consider adopting these codes, adopting the amendments, adopting the contractor licensing program and the fees and the amendments to Appendix X.
Okay, and we'll try to remember that we got out our shovels and we dug it in unreasonable depth.
Right.
If I could circle back around while I was talking about the building department fee schedule, back in the contractor licensing, which if I'm out of line by jumping back here, I'm sorry. You guys wanted us to compare to our neighbors. When we were developing the contractor licensing requirements, those are largely reflective of what other jurisdictions are doing. That's why we felt comfortable with the reciprocity of contractor licensing from other jurisdictions.
I'm most curious about Gilpin County.
Gilpin County? Okay.
Great.
Maybe Park County too.
Which one?
Park.
County too.
Park County?
Okay.
We should just do an analysis of what other counties are doing.
I mean, I think we can be pretty secure to know that, Jeffco, Summit, Larimer, like
Yeah.
the Front Range mountain counties that
But
are most
And
like
Lake.
us are the north and south, maybe Lake too.
yeah, Lake is a good comparison. Lake, Gilpin and Park all have good, good, slightly different analogs to us.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Yes.
Did we want to do the contractor licensing fee schedule? We do have to do a work session for that, don't we?
We can look at that. The contract, we do have a contractor licensing fee schedule that was included, that we would want to include in these resolutions as well. So that's separate from the program.
So contractor licensing fee schedule is not a direct cost recovery method, but the ideal is to recover the cost for administering the contractor licensing requirements. These fees are based on what neighboring and other counties who have contractor licensing requirements. So that's where we started with our base when we created this fee schedule. It's fairly simple: an application review fee, annual contractor licensing fee, an annual review fee, which I'm realizing now that I probably need to retitle, renew of suspended and revoked license, and an appeal fee.
And is there also a renewal application?
No, there's not a renewal application fee.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hadn't caught that nuance. It helps me understand the question that I'm not going to ask anymore.
So that will be included then on December 17th as well. That piece of cool. Thank you, Dave. Good catch.
Thank you both.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I
Last,
support contractor licensing, by the way.
It's a good idea. I can't inspect everything. There's some things that are going to happen that I'm not going to be on site for.
I think you hit on it pretty well. That the break point is somewhere that Class C license a little more accessible and is implied right there, and not a ton. And it could be just in the types, part of it's just in the types of experience that qualifying in 5 years is going to get you most of the way there. I think.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
sorry.
you get, last item on the agenda is a work session to discuss Clear Creek Fire Authority organizational review next steps. I only have one thing on my mind.
I could share with you, it's scheduled, your IG is scheduled to come before you the next meeting on the 10th, your next meeting of the joint Your next joint meeting is the 13th, the Friday, Health and Wellness Center, 10 a.m.
I actually have two things. Silver Plume was on the agenda to approve it. They chose not to because they wanted to have the fire chief present in the room. I asked the fire chief if we should expect any surprises from his comments in Silver Plume, and he said no. He intends to recommend that they sign it, which I think is help you all sleep better if you weren't going to sleep well over this.
You indicated the date, I thought. Thought their meeting was, you just let me know.
Yeah, it's like their next meeting.
Very
It might, yeah.
It's Monday,
That's fine.
Monday
I can
night.
Look it up.
Oh.
I don't remember the date. I have it written down.
Just such a little box. I know. I just sent it for you. I can. Didn't know if that was.
The only other thing that I have to share is that, just make sure you both know, we are not able to run a tax proposal in May. So we have, that changes my thinking about how and when to survey for other emergency services and blah, blah, blah. So I just wanted to get that into your heads.
I just thought of one commissioner update item that I thought of today before I came over here that I just want to mention. Because it's not related to this, so why don't we finish this discussion first?
Okay. I think we just did, unless anybody has anything else. Nope.
This part. It's just, and you may be aware of this, you know, but the cause of funding. Go
Sorry,
ahead.
just really quick. We're going back to commissioner update.
I just want to mention one thing that occurred to me that I just wanted to share. The US Forest Service is grossly underfunded right now. The reason I'm saying this is it might apply to some other federal agencies we're dealing with too. They're not hiring, their plans for 2025, including in their budget, they've been told that they're hiring no seasonal help this coming year, period. And in addition to that, they've been told that they are to look at everybody that they've recently hired and given commitments to that hasn't started yet and try to back out of everything that and I asked if they were having a hiring freeze and they said, no, there's not a hiring freeze, but we've been asked to go back and unhire people that we haven't already brought on board yet, onboarded, which is almost worse than a hiring freeze. And none of that is, so they don't even know how they're going to do things. Like at Mount Blue Sky as an example, they've got a little bit of a break because they don't have to really man stuff up there this year and clean the toilets and do all that stuff. But they're really reeling and they don't even have any idea how they're going to maintain their assets in the next year or two. And that's without taking into consideration the election results and how that's going to change funding in those areas as well, or likely to. And I just thought that's something we need to know about as we're dealing with the Forest Service and some other people like them. They're really in a strange place right now. Suddenly they're half out of business, you know, with that.
We can commiserate at a pretty high level inside this organization, can't we? On that one. Okay, thank you for the update. Yeah. We are adjourned. Thank you all. Long meeting.